Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, November 13th. It's day 38 since everything began on October 7th with the attack of Hamas in South Israel. And then the Israeli government turned off water, electricity, and gas on the civilian population in Gaza and began bombing Gaza in response to Hamas, with the devastating effect on civilians in Gaza. I have lots of updates, particularly since on the weekends I try to report on other things. Yesterday I did a reading from the book of Esther. So today I wanted to update you about some things that happened over the weekend. This past weekend, there was a very large summit, an Islamic Arab summit in Riyadh, which is in Saudi Arabia, to discuss the Israel-Hamas war. There were leaders there from the Gulf, Iran, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, and Syria, and they called for an end to, quote, Israeli aggression against Gaza, end quote. They called for more humanitarian aid, a freeze on international arms exports to Israel. And the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said that Israel bears the responsibility for, quote, crimes committed against the Palestinian people, end quote. And one of the conversations in the media, but also in, I just had a press briefing today, and in other conversations, is as Israel is held responsible for crimes that are happening in Gaza, one of the concerns is the U.S. has been so supportive of Israel that increasingly the United States is also being considered responsible for what's happening in Gaza as well. The French President Macron urged Israel to halt the bombings in Gaza, saying that there was, quote, no justification, end quote, for the Israeli bombing of babies, women, and old people in Gaza, and he called for a ceasefire. Prime Minister Netanyahu responded that civilian deaths are the responsibility of Hamas. Hezbollah's chief, Hassan Nasrallah, gave his second speech since the start of the war, and he said that Iran supports, quote, the axis of resistance, which includes Hamas, Hezbollah, Yemen's Houthis, and the Iraqi Shia groups. And they are against Israel, quote, in all aspects. He said that despite there being no demand in the Arab world to act militarily against Israel, that it should offer a unified front, quote, to pressure the U.S., end quote, to enforce a ceasefire. Israelis are gathering all across the country in Israel to call on their government to secure an immediate release of Israeli hostages that have been taken by Hamas. The Washington Post reported that communications and internet networks in Gaza will be cut off by this Thursday due to infrastructure damage and a lack of fuel. And Palestinian communications minister in Ramallah, Ishaq Sider, warned that was going to happen. He warned it this weekend that by Thursday, communications will be cut off in Gaza because the fuel situation has become so severe. The healthcare infrastructure in Gaza is facing collapse. There's been fierce fighting. It is raging around the hospitals. There's dwindling food, fuel, and water. Gaza's health ministry said that their largest hospital, Al-Shifa, was, and this is his words, an open war zone on Sunday, a day after the ministry's director general told the Washington Post that Israeli forces were, quote, striking us from all sides, end quote. Israel denied that its forces were targeting or blockading Al-Shifa. And the situation at the hospital is dire and perilous, said the director general of the World Health Organization on social media on Sunday. The director general of the World Health Organization had been in touch with healthcare workers at the hospital earlier and said it's been 3 days without electricity, without water. There's very poor internet, which has severely impacted the hospital's ability to provide essential care. Regrettably, the hospital is not functioning as a hospital anymore, and patient fatalities have increased. And so once again, we're calling for an immediate ceasefire. The Israeli Defense Forces offered to evacuate babies from Al-Shifa Hospital to a, quote, safer facility, end quote, said an IDF Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson. But Al Borsh, who's the Director General of the Gaza Health Ministry, who was at Al-Shifa Hospital, said that moving babies was not an option. We do know that 2 premature infants that were on incubators died when the power went out, and the lives of 36 more babies are at risk, health officials have reported. We heard on November 12th, which was yesterday, that the World Health Organization has lost communications with Shifa Hospital. And the situation is worsening at other hospitals in Gaza as well, including Al-Quds, which the Palestine Red Crescent Society said on Sunday had run out of power and was no longer operational. In terms of the future of Gaza, there are mixed messages about what's going to happen next coming out of Israel. The Washington Post reported that Netanyahu said that he was ruling out any role for the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip, saying that Israel would assert total security control after the fighting ends. But then I've read other reports that Netanyahu had backtracked on that statement. And so there's a lot of confusion in the media about what the Israelis are saying would happen once bombing and the war comes to an end. And on Sunday, President Biden said, and this is a quote from President Biden, that he affirmed his vision for the future Palestinian state, where Israelis and Palestinians could live side by side with equal measures of stability and dignity. He noted that Hamas is an impediment to that, according to his statement. We also know that the U.S. has attacked more Iranian-backed sites. It was reported on Sunday that there was a third wave of airstrikes from the United States against Iranian facilities in Syria, and they were linked with dozens of attacks against U.S. forces in recent weeks. We know that there were a number of fatalities, and this coincides with efforts by the Biden administration to deter violence without getting dragged into a broader regional conflict amid the war with Gaza. In terms of UNRWA funding, top congressional Republicans are pushing to reject funding for Gaza's biggest humanitarian relief operation. And they're citing that there are alleged ties between the UN Refugee Agency and Hamas, even as an aid organization. UNRWA is begging for help right now. It's currently responsible for more than 600,000 people in Gaza. UNRWA stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, and it's providing food and shelter to millions of Gazans affected by the Israeli military strikes and the ground invasion. But it's facing quite intensifying political backlash from conservatives and Republicans, GOP lawmakers in DC. And just today, we got a note from some of our contacts on the ground who have staff in Egypt and Palestine, and they heard that UNRWA informed them that they are running out of fuel today, which means that there will be no aid for UNRWA facilities starting tomorrow. That means water and sewage will be out. Water and sewage will be out starting the day after tomorrow, and that means no potable water, as well as the water sources. They depend on the fuel to be able to pump water that UNRWA was distributing, and they also confirmed that all communications will be out on Thursday. So the situation in Gaza is just horrific. We would invite you, join us in calling for a ceasefire. If you're in Washington, D.C., or if you'd like to come to D.C., that's where I am now. We will have a gathering at Lafayette Park at 6 p.m. On the 20th of November. Join us starting Monday the 20th. During the day, we'll have calls to Congress, prayer on Wednesdays, and we'll have a briefing on Thursday. And may God go before us.